welcome back to the Adventures in Advising podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today. Always appreciate your support. This is Matt Markin, and hello to Ryan Shekel. What's up, bud?
Hey, Matt, how are things?
Things are where they are. It's registration
right.
season by the time we're recording this episode, so hopefully things are going well with you. And, guess what, everyone? We will be talking about generative AI. It's not just a topic Ryan and I like to chat about, but it's also super relevant for, the upcoming months or years. What do you think, Ryan?
Well, I know that if we're ever going to really come to terms with any significant change in post-secondary education, we're going to have to talk with a lot of people about it, hear different perspectives and see different sides of it. So I'm really excited about today's conversation, talking with some folks, specifically from the instructional staff, the faculty side of the conversation. It's going to be really great to see what's going on with folks who spend most of their time with students in the classroom.
Absolutely. And yeah, just hearing different perspectives, different voices. And, we've heard various ones already. We've heard from Dr. Roy Magnuson, Director of Emerging Technologies for Instruction and Research at Illinois State University back in December. We've both, quote unquote, interviewed ChatGPT. We've looked at possibilities of Thea Study and Google's Notebook LM. We've heard from administrators from other institutions on panels that we've conducted at conferences and previous podcast episodes about AI. And, today's episode, like you were saying, we get to hear from two faculty members with California State University, San Bernardino. And let's go ahead and welcome them right now. And we have Dr. Daniel MacDonald and Dr. Jeremy Murray. Daniel and Jeremy, welcome to Adventures in Advising.
Hey, Matt. Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Ryan and Matt. This is I appreciate you listening in and hearing our perspectives.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we dive into talking about AI, it's always nice to hear about the backgrounds of our guests. So we'll like to hear from the both of you about what's been your journey into higher ed. And I think we'll start with Daniel first.
Sure. Well, thanks again for having me. My name is Daniel MacDonald. I started my career in higher ed with CSUSB here in 2013. So before that, I had majored in math and economics at Seton Hall University. I graduated in 2007. And then I went on to get my PhD in economics from University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2013. And pretty much since 2013, I've been out here at CSUSB. I've kind of climbed the ranks. I was an assistant professor for 6 years. I got tenure in 2019. I became the chair of our department in economics here in 2021. And I just have pretty much lived my entire life within higher ed. So it's all about the intellectual journey for me and, just being out there, engaging with students, engaging with ideas, doing research, the academic life. It's really just always been a part of who I am. And so that's a little bit about me.
Hey, Daniel. It's funny, we kind of have some connection there. I grew up in upstate New York, very close to Amherst, actually. Went to SUNY Albany as an undergrad, did East Asian studies, and started studying Chinese and found my way into Chinese history. And that took me across here to California, to UCSD, for my PhD. And then I got this job just up the highway here about, 14 years ago, almost 14 years ago. And as a first generation undergraduate, I always, at SUNY Albany, I kind of identified, I think, with the students there and also with a lot of our students here where, as Daniel said, it's just all about coming in and working with our students and in this sort of really rewarding work of empowering students who want to be in the classroom and are excited to be here. And because I know what that feels like.
Yeah, and I know Ryan and I, when we've talked about this topic that we're going to, now talk about with AI, we were like, oh, who can we ask? And I was like, well, I know someone. And, I know Daniel and I have chatted before about AI. We've worked on other projects together. One of the proactive faculty members that I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. And then Daniel said, I know someone else that might be interested in chatting about this and kind of roped you in. So again, appreciate you both being here. And, I'll just throw one more question out before throwing it to Ryan. We're both interested to know about, from your standpoint, kind of your personal views in general about AI. What would you say those are?
Jeremy, do you want to go first?
I'll go first, and I'll sort of see below because I think we're gonna talk about it a lot. But in a big sense, I think the short answer is that, as I understand it, it's a sprawling topic across many disciplines, across many walks of life. Obviously, many aspects of what we do as professionals in academia, but also around really important issues of the social, cultural, political, economic impacts of these things. It's an absolutely sprawling topic, and one I think that is best engaged with in a way that is precise. And so when we talk specifically about the classroom or about research, even within higher ed, we're talking about a lot of different sort of topics. The big soundbite that I heard a friend say was, he's a lawyer, and he said a lawyer is not going to be replaced by AI, but a lawyer who knows how to use AI is going to replace a lawyer who is sort of a Luddite about AI. So that's my take professionally. I kind of understand that there are important things to bear in mind, but I also have a really strong skepticism toward profit-driven sort of shareholder capitalism when it gets a hold of powerful technology. And we see the results, obviously, in the way social media affects young people. I think the evidence is on that, and it sure ain't good. So that's a big one. And a lot of the sort of, and Daniel will have, I think, a lot of great perspective on the economic side of things in terms of something like the Industrial Revolution, the cotton gin, and we can talk about Gutenberg and all those other. I'll come in as a historian and do my part in terms of those hasty analogies. We can talk a lot more about that, but that's the quick version, is that it's sprawling and complex and demands precision in how we talk about it.
Yeah, I completely share Jeremy's concerns, especially with the capitalistic nature in which a lot of these things are developing. A lot of these companies that have these AI systems are financialized, right? They're traded on the stock market. And so they have kind of perverse incentives, right? They don't always have the incentives to kind of give back to the community or to, make the world a better place, can ultimately be about kind of pleasing investors. It's funny because I'm actually very pro AI when it comes to my own work. I think similar to what Jeremy was saying, professors or lawyers who know how to use AI are going to have a step up, right? A leg up on other professors or lawyers who don't. So I do think that it's really, great in terms of my own work. I found in so many ways, but I do think that as a professor, as a teacher, that coursework and AI are like oil and water. They're really they can't mix. The coursework, the way academics is set up is it's often not about what you think, right? It's about how you think. It's about training students how to think, right? I think all of us who teach in higher ed would agree that, even though, there are the dates or the formulas that you have to know, ultimately what we're trying to get our students to do is to think. And AI replaces that, right? So it's almost antithetical to the entire kind of academic journey. And so that's where I'm really concerned, is that if you combine these kind of capitalistic incentives, right, that so many of these companies have, with the fact that, ultimately AI should be, something to improve productivity, and in the classroom, how we're trying to get students to think, it doesn't seem like it's going to mix very well.
So given your sort of personal perspectives on AI, and the concerns that you have as instructors and people trying to get students to think, do you have your own AI policy in your syllabus, or is there a departmental policy that you're following? Like, what kind of scaffolding support do you have, not only for yourselves and your colleagues, but for students understanding what the expectations and the sort of the parameters are in the classroom?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
They say teaching is the mother of all professions, but right now it feels like it's happening inside a pressure cooker. That's why we created Higher Listenings, bringing a dose of joy to the future of learning. We're exploring things like why reading may not be obsolete after all, the remarkable connection between emotion and learning, and the real reason students cheat.
It's not a moral failing. It's the circumstances that they find themselves in.
Join us in Higher Listenings, because those who can make a difference teach.
Sure, that's a really good question. I'll just take this first, Jeremy, just because on the administrative side, right? I've been chair for, this is my 4th year now, and I have some junior faculty who, if you're a junior faculty, you're already extremely stressed out, right? You're on the tenure track. You're trying to juggle teaching with research expectations. And so having this come out of left field, right, is just extremely stressful. And so what we've done in our department is we've built up a department level AI policy, because, you know, the university has, and most universities have taken a kind of a passive view on this. But, you know, when you actually get into the details and the nitty gritty, it is important that faculty have a kind of a unified voice or a unified position, so that if a student does come up with some kind of issue or concern regarding a faculty's claim that, you know, this is plagiarism, which AI clearly is, right? Any representation of someone else's work is plagiarism, right? And so our faculty, especially again our junior faculty, we felt like they needed something to kind of fall back on, right? Like an authority that they can kind of refer to and say, well, this is what our department AI policy is, and so this is what's going to be enforced. It just takes a little bit of that stress off of them, so they can kind of focus on teaching and you know, getting things done in the classroom, which is the ultimate goal, right, of our courses. It's not to, you know, micromanage students' AI use. So we do have a department level AI policy, and I think it's very important to set those kinds of boundaries and be very explicit, again, especially for junior faculty that already have so much on their plate and they don't have time really to you know, manage all of these different technologies and things that are happening.
I agree wholeheartedly with Daniel. We've got some department level policies that have been posted on our website. They, as Daniel said, these align pretty neatly with plagiarism policies. You know, Wikipedia has been around for a while. I think it's terrific and in really good hands. You know, it can be a very powerful tool in the same way that now we kind of involuntarily, well, I guess not, we choose to use Google, but Google has an AI function in its basic search, right? So if you're Googling, whereas the top hit used to be Wikipedia, now it may be a sort of AI generated answer. My brother, who's a lawyer out in Atlanta, had some coworkers or some people working for him who are using that Google AI function and coming up with incorrect answers about really important matters related to real estate law. And he caught it. He was the senior lawyer in the situation. He said, "No, that's wrong. Where'd you get that?" And they said, "Well, I searched it and it came up as the first hit." Right. So that, I think that just the simple wrongness, is that a word? Of this, I think is an issue. And again, not to discredit the really sophisticated aspects of these tools. I think that as either a one-stop shop or as a first stop, I think it's deeply problematic. And so I strongly discourage it within my classes, but also recognizing that there may be some fun uses for it. You could train something and say, how would Confucius respond to a traffic violation in a desert highway, and there's a 4-way stop, and you can see for 20 miles that no cars are coming? Can you just blow through that stop sign? And I would be interested in somebody training a language model to say, how would Confucius respond to my question? That's fun. You know, that's a neat thing to do, and it's pretty cool. You know, how would Mencius respond to his name being used by a white nationalist? You know, that would be something I think he would be interested in. You know, those kind of things are fun aspects of it. And so I would never discourage students from that kind of technological and I think potentially very, very interesting kind of play. But when it comes to directly answering anything, I think that's a problem, obviously, in terms of copy and pasting. I have tinkered with it a little bit. I think it may present really interesting things for me, particularly in Asian studies, in East Asian studies, Chinese studies, for scholars who are moving into the field to potentially be able to translate vast amounts of material very, very quickly. Again, translation is not to be discredited. And I think what translation is not simply a sort of numeric conversion of values, but is something that's much more deep in terms of understanding the culture and the history of what's going on with the language at that moment. But, that said, I think that there is some shovel work to be done for somebody who has those skills and who has gone through the sort of rigorous language training to say, well, I can, if I can translate this, the index of this archive, I'm going to know what box to go into to get the particular case that I'm looking for. And so I think there is a lot of value there. And in the same way, discrediting what it is potentially problematic. But I think, I love that we have services on our campus to start to help people to understand this, to understand it and its power.
And, you're talking about some of the resources or services that, let's say, CSUSB might offer, other institutions might offer. But then you have certain institutions, like, let's say, the Cal State University system that has ChatGPT available, or their version of ChatGPT education available for all faculty, staff, and students. You might have students from their perspective saying, well, I think like most 18 to 24-year-olds are using AI, and there's so many platforms out there nowadays. And I definitely get it in the sense that it's not everything's going to be as accurate, but it's always developing. But a student may not necessarily, you may have your policy where a student may not be able to use AI or is not, or is frowned upon to use it. But what if a student's like, I could use it for fun, but could I use it not necessarily to complete an assignment, but maybe to help me better prepare for something that's being learned in the class, and it can be like my study buddy in a sense?
Again, I would really say that I don't think it should be used for those situations. Students are not allowed to use AI in my course for generating any answers to problem set questions or writing prompts that I might give them. For example, in my economic history course, they could use it to check their work. I think that verification is something that's kind of, it's not as appreciated within AI, and AI itself is not actually very good at verifying its own work, right? Like those early discussions of hallucinations and so on. But it's possible that in those kind of contexts, maybe they could use it to check their work, but they should still be, working everything else out on their own. Maybe in a research methods course, there might be some space for them to maybe bounce ideas off of AI in terms of, well, I'm thinking of taking this approach, or what are some drawbacks of using this model over that model? What do you think of this argument? What is the best argument against, my thesis? And have them engage, because that's the kind of way that I use it. I've really found that it helps a lot. We'll talk about this, I think, a little bit later, but with critical thinking, it can help students. But in most cases, it's not going to be the right approach. As I was saying earlier, right? The coursework is fundamentally about getting students to learn how to think, to engage with that process. Thinking is hard. It is. Like, it's very hard to do for more than just a couple minutes. Just try it, It's difficult to just sit there and really think about something. But that's what we're trying to train our students to do. And AI just offers such a quick shortcut. It's not advised.
I just love hanging out with Daniel because I always hear cool stuff like that. Thinking is hard. And then that gives me so much to think about. But I agree 100%. With this idea that thinking is hard, and our job is not to make people comfortable. I think, and Of course, we empower people so that they kind of get to base camp, and hopefully then they get to 10,000 feet and do so in a way that's safe and responsible, and then they get comfortable at 10,000 feet. You know, that's what we want them to get up there, to get to base camp, and then to get to 10,000 feet. But I think because I don't want to repeat what Daniel said, I just agree with what he said down the line. The one thing I would add is the big issue of accessibility, which is an important one for us to bear in mind throughout. And just a sort of minor point on because you mentioned this, Matt, in your notes to us, Notebook LM, and I think other programs may offer this sort of text to speech option in a pretty interesting way, where they kind of make it sound conversational. And I think that's fine. You know, if you want to, I know some of my students put their PDF books into some kind of service where it sounds like Snoop Dogg is reading it. I'm like, that's great. You know, fine. You know, if you want to do text to speech and everybody's having fun, I definitely enjoy being able to listen to articles or listen to books when I'm driving. You know, we're all here in Southern California. We want to be able to do that when possible. And when it's an accessibility issue, that's especially, I think, important to if we're actually increasing accessibility, then that's an interesting thing. So if you can do text to speech in a way that is more fluent than what we could do even 3 or 4 years ago, cool, as the kids would say.
So I'm kind of curious because I think it's important for our listeners and for everyone to understand the difference in the disciplines that y'all come from. And the nature of the courses that you teach and the concepts that are in them. This is sort of a two-part question, but the first thing I'm curious about as I'm listening to your answers and your approaches to answering the question is, do you feel that this might be different in different disciplines, that the sort of approach to answering the question, is it appropriate? Can it be used? How it can be used? Do you feel it might vary by discipline academically? And then I'm also, because we're sitting here in this space where this thing is out and it exists. It's here. We've got to come to terms with it. Do you remember a time when you didn't have to deal with it? And how do you feel things have changed for you as you approach instruction before AI and post AI? So do you feel it's different by discipline? And how do you feel you're different prior to AI as instructors?
Sure. I'm going to go a little boring on this. So I'm going to say basically that I don't think there's a lot of discipline specific things, first of all, and that my instruction really hasn't changed too much before and after. And let me explain. So first of all, as I was saying earlier, I really think that the goal in higher ed is to get students to learn how to think, right? And that doesn't, that's not discipline specific, right? So for example, in my economics classes, it's true. I have, in my econometrics class, I have very specific challenges related to coding. So in my class, they code in Python. And so they'll be asked to write some Python code to solve an econometrics problem. And, I'll have a couple students who go to ChatGPT and they just plug everything in ChatGPT and say, what's the answer here? And it's so instructive what ChatGPT does, right? Because it gives an answer, but the code that it uses is way above the student's level, right? So the code is not, within what I taught. Like I taught the students how to approach these kinds of problems in the class, right? But then they just go, they ignore it, or they didn't come to class. They plug the prompt into ChatGPT and they get these, methods or these libraries that I've never talked about in the classroom, right? The whole point of those assignments is to get them to use the tools that they've developed in the course to solve a problem, right? It's not to just put an answer on the piece of paper. So it's very instructive of that. And so, I also teach economic history though. And in economic history, it's very different. They read about social history and legal history, and I'll have them, I'll ask them questions about some, particular historical period and what would, how would this look if we were to deal with a similar situation today, right? And again, you can go to ChatGPT and get an answer, but it's really about taking what we've learned in the course, right, and applying that to some problem that I've given them, right, to help them in that process of thinking, right? So just right there, right? And I think, in most other disciplines, it's not about just giving some answer, right? It's not about just finding some answer to a problem or a question. It's about how do we think this through, right? And so again, and then to the second part of your question about like before and after. Well, again, in general, I have always in my courses focused on getting students to learn how to think. And that doesn't change before and after AI. If anything, it becomes more important after AI, right? Because before AI, of course, it's important, but after AI, what ends up happening is if you can learn how to think and if you can learn how to approach problems yourself, that gives you then the confidence to, if later on presented with a new problem, ask AI for a little bit of assistance, right? Because you already know in general the structure of the problem. And so that's where AI can help. That's where it helps me, for example. I already know a lot of the, things that are going on, but AI can help me, maybe shed some light on something or be that kind of critical perspective, right? So that's So that would be my answer.
Thanks, Daniel, and thanks, Ryan, for the question. I need to think. I need to continue to think, like you said, that the sort of horses out of the barn, and we need to think about this tool being out there, our students having access to it, whether in the freemium form, whether in the paid form or the free form. And I think a couple things. And Daniel sparked off a couple ideas here. That there's of course the old saw of the journey, not the destination, is a good one. And in literal AI sense, I watched the movie Matrix when it came out, and it didn't really change my life or anything. But I know it's a very important movie for a lot of people. And there's a scene where he said, I just remember this scene where somebody uploads kung fu into his brain. I don't know if you remember this scene, but he's like, I know kung fu. And like, how bleak is that? That's the bleakest idea I've ever beheld. To think that all of the work, and kung fu in Chinese means work, actually, the word means work, all of the work that would go into that, and it's just been bypassed like a video game character, to me is wild and deeply depressing. It gets me really upset and really sad for a mentality that would say, yes, I wish I knew kung fu right now. And I understand that like in a child. I understand that like, and our students aren't children, really. I understand like a kid, like, yeah, I want to be like I want to know 17 languages and I want to be master of all these things. And, this cool. Okay. And I understand that. And my kid's getting into D&D and Star Trek. And we can talk about Data later if you want from the Next Generation. It was really cool. But I think that idea of bypassing is what sort of Daniel's answer got me thinking about. It's so important. I think in terms of how I teach, it's always been concerned about that, Ryan, to your question. I've always been concerned about making sure, as Daniel said, that students are engaged with the process of becoming better thinkers, and becoming more critical thinkers, and also being more skilled in being able to articulate what they do. And on that front, I always have aimed, and I've always done pop quizzes. I'm kind of a Luddite in this sense, where I do lots of paper pop quizzes in my classes. Students love that, as you can imagine. It's funny, they don't love it at first, and then at the end they're like, come on, hit me with a pop quiz, I'm ready. And there's always a how and a why in there in history. Why did you draw this point out from the essay? Why did you draw this point out from the reading? And I take it a little bit farther than that, and I ask, why is it specifically important to you? And that gets tricky when we're talking about Chinese history 2,000 years ago. But like Confucius and the stop sign, you can make it immediately relevant to you when you talk about rituals, or when you talk about the way you feel about your parents, or the way you feel about society or the law or philosophy. You can, and one of the things we have to do is to make these things immediately relevant. That's how we teach students to travel light. That's how we teach students to become sort of engines of critical thinking and articulation of their deeply held beliefs and ideas. They can travel light with those ideas in their back pocket if they are practiced. in expressing themselves and processing large amounts of information without the help of a device that I think can be sort of self-infantilizing as well. The idea that I have to read a 500-page book for tomorrow, I just can't do it, or I can't even start. I can't even start that journey. I'm so discouraged by the prospect of starting to read a 500-page book that I'm just gonna phone it in. And it's because they haven't been made to do that. They haven't been required to do that. And they do it. Like, oh, I can't. Hit me with another pop quiz. I'm ready. They do 10 of them and they're ready to go.
Jeremy, like you were mentioning about making it more that these students can connect with it. So maybe like on that personal level, does the fact that even though you both might have like your policies written in the syllabus or have a department policy, students probably are still going to, have the opportunity to still use AI in some format. Does that change up how you go about like assignments and how you go about teaching the material to students?
I recognize they can enter, for example, the name of the textbook or whatever, and say summarize chapter 3, and it can say, well, how would you like to sound? I can give it to you in 1,000 different ways. I can do an interpretive dance and give for chapter 3. The device is so clever; it can do anything. So what I do is I get them to introduce themselves to their classmates, in a real way, and to talk about their experience. And as you all know, at our school, we have students come from, vast array of backgrounds and experiences. And I say, bring that to the class. You've got to bring yourself to the class. Not in every single thing, obviously, that's impractical, but in, as much as you can, bring yourself to the content, to the material. I don't know. I mean, in terms of what they do beyond the classroom, I know that they can get a really nice summary of the chapter from a language model. So I don't ask them for a 10-point summary of the chapter. It's nice if you can do that. Great. It's not hard. And maybe I should actually, after chatting with you guys, maybe we should do that. Maybe I should go through share screen in the opening of class and say, okay, here's how you would do a 10-point chapter summary if you want. All right. If you want a 10-point chapter summary, if you want to turn it into a sort of something that sounds like a conversation the way Google LM does, fine. That's fun. But then let's get to work and let's figure out how we make sense of this and make it yours. Take ownership of that process. It's an open question though.
Yeah, I mostly agree with Jeremy. I think bringing that personal element is so important. I mean, that's ultimately what, these students are doing. They should be investing in themselves. And that's about, that's what college is partly about, right? Is finding your own unique space within all of this environment. The only thing I would add is that I do think that, kind of summaries are not that effective. But what I've done since AI that is a little bit different than what I did before is I will have references to the lectures. So, for example, using what we learned in class this day, answer this question. Or, how would this author that we read about in class approach this particular question, right? So that more kind of context-rich kind of assessments. Again, it's not, to go back to what Ryan was asking, it's not exactly different from what I did before, because before I could just ask questions and I basically assumed that the students were using the course material to answer the questions, right? But now you can't assume that anymore, right? You have to be more explicit, using the technique that we developed in Wednesday's course, Wednesday's class, solve this problem, right? And that also makes it very hard for them to use AI, right? Because, well, what did I cover on Wednesday's class? I didn't cover the Hessian matrix. I showed a different method of optimization, right? So those kinds of things can really kind of help, kind of pick out who are the students who might be using the AI. But ultimately, it's about kind of, always referring back to what we've been talking about in class and, just making sure that everything sticks within some kind of embedded context. And so, yeah, that would be my answer.
So I'm curious, you've given little hints here or there, but how are y'all using AI? If it's with regard to your work, or like as Jeremy was discussing with play, but like when you're using AI, where and how are you using it?
I use it, and it's really helped me in a lot of amazing ways. I really can't even begin to express how good it's been for my own work. Coding is one of the major things. When I have data work that I need to get done, and I have a technique that maybe I'm aware of, but I don't remember how to implement it, just running to ChatGPT, throwing it in there is just so great. Having something so I don't have to search through Stack Overflow for an hour on how to solve this particular coding issue. But then even in kind of bigger ways. So for example, I had something that I was writing a while back, and it was engaging with another piece. And I was having some trouble engaging with the piece. And I basically ran it through ChatGPT, and I said, how could I engage with this piece? What are some of the weak points of this piece? What are some of the strong points of this piece? And it gave me some great suggestions for how to basically angle my critique. And there have been other times where it kind of goes in the other direction. So I'll put forward a piece that I feel pretty good about, and I'll say, what are your hardest arguments against this? Just be harsh on me, right? Just let me know what you think. And that'll start a conversation where, they'll make some points, and I'll say, well, this is what I think about these things. And if you prompt it correctly, right? If you don't just like run something through there and say, summarize this, right? But if you really say, what are the weak points? How could this be improved? I've done things where I've got a deadline in a couple of weeks for a particular research report or product or something. And I'll say, set me up a schedule so I can finish this in 2 weeks. And they'll say, okay, for the first 2 days, do the summary statistics. For the next few days, work on the literature review. And it's been just amazingly supportive. I think something that Jeremy will also identify with is like, we both, like in grad school, there's grad students, smart people all around you all the time. Right. And of course, like being in a university, working in a university, there's still a lot of PhDs around you all the time. But we also have service, right? We have a lot of other commitments that we have that are not intellectual, right? So it can be hard to have that same kind of environment where we had in grad school, where you just go to a seminar and you're exposed to a completely new idea, right? Or topic. Or again, you've got grad students sharing an office with you, and you can just ask them about a problem. We don't have that so much. So AI can act as something like that, though. It can be that smart grad student that you just want to bounce a couple ideas off, or, oh, I really need some support on this. I don't feel like I have a good argument. How can it improve? How can I improve on this? And so for me, it's just been amazing, almost as a kind of like a colleague to help me in, emotional, intellectual, all sorts of different ways with my work.
I have, like Ryan said, tinkered with it more in my work than deploying it this way. But these sound really effective, the methods that Daniel's describing, especially in terms of things like planning out a large project. That's really cool. Sort of thinking, how do I get to a draft in 2 weeks or something like that. So I'm not a Luddite in that sense where I'm just going to smash it. I'm interested and also kind of respectful the way you would be of like a tiger. So this is a powerful thing, and there are ways that it can be used, and there are ways that it can be deployed. Again, I've done some work with this sort of designing a hypothetical Confucius and that kind of thing, and our Faculty Center for Excellence, FCE crew has put together a really terrific page, sort of tiles that help you think about things like creating really good prompts, really effective prompts. And so I've looked at a little bit of that, but I haven't. I'm still in the learning phase for myself in terms of how do I identify the best methods that I could apply and put them into practice. But I like the idea of learning more and gaining more efficiency and that kind of thing. Optimizing. I'm always wary of the word optimizing. I'm reminded of my students. I saw a kid with a bumper sticker on his laptop that said, "Drink coffee, do stupid things faster." And so the sort of optimizing thing, I want to be really clear about what I'm optimizing, and all the things Daniel listed just now are terrific, are really great. So I want to learn more about this. I'm still very much in the learning mode, and I'm very grateful for our FCE gang for putting together great stuff along those lines.
Jeremy, that's actually such a great quote, do stupid things faster with coffee, because it kind of borders what AI can end up being, right? Because if you don't sit there and kind of verify what AI is up to, you can get lost really quickly, right? Not just hallucinations, but like, what are you even talking about, right? So it is very much a human in the loop process, right? You got to keep the human part in it, right? Because if you just let AI kind of run with something, it can end up being almost, it can be like, because they go so fast, right? It's typing so fast. Like, how did you even process what I just put a paragraph prompt in here. How do you even process that, right? You do have to kind of say, well, wait a second, like, let's pull back a little bit. It's very important to realize the inefficiencies or just the gaps that any AI is going to have.
And I like that they haven't given it a name they haven't called it Siri or whatever. It's a beast. It's like it is something that we are incapable of sort of reckoning with in any kind of conversational way. The way the four of us are chatting right now, there's something different happening there, and it may be trying to please us. Again, I'm personifying what it is doing, I think, and this is I want to try not to sound too conspiratorial here, but what I think it is trying to do is maximize engagement, and that is this sort of open the pod bay doors, Hal, sort of moment where that's from Space Odyssey 2001, where the beast that he's encountering, or this algorithm that he's encountering, realizes that something he's asked it to do is in violation of its primary protocol or something like that, which is to turn it off. And I think that when we're dealing with something like a meta product, its primary function is to keep us engaged, awake and engaged. That is, encountering whatever freemium services they are. It could be advertising, could be something else, which is different for the AI things, but I think that we'll probably drift in that direction unless something really course corrects very soon. We're going to drift in the direction of maximizing engagement. And that is troubling because, like Daniel said initially, thinking is difficult. It is uncomfortable. And a tech guru is more interested in keeping us comfortable and engaged. And that's a very, very different function that maybe is even antithetical. Right? If the aim of this program is to keep us engaged, and our physical and intellectual comfort is part of that engagement, then I'm very, very, very wary of the kind of primary design of this thing, right? And I'm not saying I know everything about all these tech guys and what they're doing, but I do know that they bring biologists in to say, so how long do humans really need to sleep? Because we want them on maybe 20 hours a day. Right. That is, and I know they don't give these products to their kids. Right. So that's kind of, I say they in a big way that sounds conspiratorial. I don't mean to be conspiratorial, but I think that understanding it with that sort of beast mode is important for us to sort of have very, very good tranquilizer darts on hand and strong iron cages to kind of understand what the potential is of having a tiger in your house.
Well, at least as a society, we already are glued to our screens as it is. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But we're going to leave it at that. We've reached our time. I'm sure we could have chat for a couple more hours. And I don't know, maybe Ryan and I in a year, we'll have you back on and see where your thoughts are at that point. But Daniel and Jeremy, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, guys. I really appreciated chatting with you. And it was good to see Jeremy as usual. So thanks for having me on and the opportunity.
Same. I always love the chance to chat with Daniel and Matt, and really nice to meet you, Ryan. This is just the beginning of so many discussions, so many important discussions, and I hope it didn't sound too much like a conspiratorial Luddite.
Well, next time we'll talk about where that Luddite term comes from, and we'll have to talk about your Calder poster behind you too. So.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And Star Trek.
That's right.
Yeah, Data. My kids just started watching it, and I think Data is there. I hope there are a lot of papers coming out soon from philosophy departments about the character Data in our discussion about AI. He's a very sunny version of AI, but
Sure.
he also had a brother in one episode. I don't know if you guys know that.
All right. So if it seemed like the interview ended abruptly, well, it kind of did. We simply ran out of time during the recording with Daniel and Jeremy, but we definitely want to thank them for sharing their perspectives as faculty. And we wanted to use this remaining time to sort of continue the conversation and / wrap up some points from this interview. That's what we wanted to have doing some of these podcast episodes related to AI is, let's hear from individuals from various backgrounds and knowledge bases, from advisor viewpoints, administrators, faculty, test out AI platforms. And of course, any viewpoint mentioned on any of these episodes is from that individual, not representative of an institution unless specifically stated. But these perspectives puts more information out there and maybe gives us some answers, but maybe also gives us a lot more questions to consider.
Yeah, I think that's what you hear in the conversation with our faculty colleagues there. That it requires more than just quick, easy answers. This question of AI, the kind of nuanced conversations that people continue to have around the topic and sorting through how it might be best used, implemented at any scale, the individual user, student, staff member, faculty member, administrator, all the way up to institutional systems. There's not going to be quick, easy answers. And the conversation is going to range. We're going to bump into some of the more nitty gritty day-to-day kinds of technical sticking points. And then we're going to get into big philosophical questions about what's the point of higher education. We heard our colleagues talking about the value of learning and learning how to think and to create and contribute in those different disciplines. I was thinking when I was listening to him talk about that I don't know how many college classes start with that. Start with this is the point of this class. Even the entry level first semester in a discipline, we're still working toward this idea of being a critical thinker, a creative thinker in this particular disciplinary space. How often it might help students to hear that from their faculty, from their instructors. And I know Jeremy and Daniel we're trying their best to balance the role of representing a discipline, representing an institution, but also speaking for themselves. And you heard them talk about how AI can help with getting things unstuck when you find a particular difficult problem, or it can take their minds into unique or different directions that maybe they hadn't considered. And that was just one of the things I really appreciated talking with them, is hearing all of those points of view from one person and in one role at an institution. Obviously, we're going to continue these conversations. The nature of AI, it's worth spending the time on it. And so I hope our listeners continue to come with us on this journey as we explore more perspectives on this AI question.
Honestly, opened my eyes up too to kind of see, from Daniel as a professor in economics or Jeremy as a professor in history, how they look at AI and why they may not want AI to be used for their students. But yeah, kind of considering, what would be the perspective of someone in the arts or humanities area, or the business area, or the natural sciences area. Daniel kind of mentioning, as a professor, he wants us, he may want to teach his students one way to arrive at an answer, but AI might give them the same answer, but in a different way. But as the professor of that course, there's meaning behind why he wants it done a certain way. And that could cause issues if a student is using AI to get to an answer, but it's that's not the way that I taught it to you. But it made me kind of think too, because Jeremy mentioned Star Trek, and we didn't really get to dive into that topic. That could be a whole series in a sense. But it was kind of mentioned how, that, yeah, they may not want AI to be used from the students' viewpoint, but they both use AI personally in the work that they do. And to me, this kind of, in my mind, it ties together in terms of Jeremy mentioning Star Trek. Because in Star Trek, set in the future, AI is used a lot. And even though AI is used in a way that, you have these onboard computers running simulations, complex formulas, the Starfleet personnel on these starships probably still know how to do all these computations and run diagnostics and do almost everything AI would do, but just at a slower rate because they had to learn this more than likely going through Starfleet Academy. So there's various episodes where something goes haywire on the starship and they have to manually take care of the situation and not rely on this advanced technology that minutes before was available at their fingertips, or it was a simple voice command. Yeah, so that's kind of like where my mind went when they were when Jeremy mentioned Star Trek, but then when they were mentioning about how they use AI, but may not want their students to use it for their classes.
Yeah, the pop culture geeks out there that are, always thinking about the sci-fi future of artificial intelligence, they know the sort of two sides of that coin, the doom and gloom and the Skynet when the machines come for us. But they also know, as I mentioned, the sort of the helpful partner, the interactive, beneficial AI that contributes, whether it's Jarvis or somebody like C3PO or Data or, the computer or whatever. And I just, I try to settle back into that sort of helpful but positive mindset of, isn't it cool that we are here at this point getting to talk about this? That we might have a chance to influence broader conversations in the future, especially from the perspective of academic advisors in a higher education context. If we're willing to wrestle with these questions and to continue to engage instead of just dismissing it or tossing it away or saying it's only bad, that just means that we have a chance to influence not only the way we think about it, maybe, but the way others do. I mean, we've said this before, our students are using it. And if advisors, I'm sure, who are listening have had those experiences when sitting across from a student, wanting them to engage their critical and creative thinking capabilities, and how easily we drift into just give me the answer. I just want the answer. But Mark Lowenstein has written and spoken about this, like the token fallacy of acquiring the credit, checking the box, earning the grade or whatever doesn't necessarily mean you learned anything. And I think every advisor can think back to examples of working with students where we're like, I'm not sure you're learning it. I know why you want an answer, but the answer really should be yours. It should be something that you discover. And so we have so much more in common with our colleagues who are faculty or administrators than we often think about. And this AI conversation is just another place where we can see that happening.
And that's so true. That's like if you're meeting with a student, you're the advisor, and the student's like, I'm coming to you so you can give me the answer. And yeah, there might be some times where like, yeah, here is the answer to this question. But other times, here's how you can arrive to the answer to this question that you may have. Jeremy and Daniel actually sent us an article prior to the recording. Again, ran out of time to get a chance to discuss it with him, but it was from Chronicle of Higher Education. The article was like, should college graduates be AI literate? More institutions are saying yes. Persuading professors is only the first barrier that they face. And kind of highlighted like real world examples of professors grappling with students, over-reliance possibly on AI, underscoring the need for understanding AI functions, its use, but also its drawbacks. But there was a quote from someone from the University of Delaware that said, like, we're currently teaching the last students who have a sense of before and after generative AI, and the ones who come on campus in 3 to 4 years, it's just going to be the water they've swum in all their lives.
Right. And this idea of literacy, I think, is an important concept to center the conversation on, because literacy implies a level of understanding and intentionality that fluency doesn't. And I just think that just because somebody is fluent in a language doesn't mean that they're necessarily thinking critically through their use of that language. Early on, back in the olden days when I started in higher education, there was all this conversation.
Way back in the day.
Way back. When they were saying students were digital natives. And that was implied to mean that they were critical, creative thinkers in that digital space. But it was like, well, they're just super comfortable in that space. And comfort doesn't necessarily mean that we're thinking critically. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to use those tools creatively or ethically or any other way. It's just we're used to it. And sometimes what we're most familiar with, we take the most for granted. And so I do think that there's reason for caution. But if our approach to expressing that caution maybe inadvertently expresses an unwillingness to engage, I think that that's a mistake on any educator's behalf to say, I'm not going to have that conversation. I'm not going to allow this. It's far better to have the full conversation, no matter how complex it is. And that's one of the things that I value so much about this opportunity in the coming weeks to continue to explore this topic of artificial intelligence, because I don't know if I would be if it wasn't for this podcast. I certainly would be playing around in it, making genmojis and who knows what else. But would I be thinking about it the way that I'm thinking about it? I'm thankful for the opportunity to do that.
Daniel and Jeremy, I think, made a great point. I never considered this was, yes, AI is here. It's not going away, but all the potential companies that are trying to make a profit off of it. And, is it just now about increasing their profit versus looking at all the other considerations, ethical considerations and things, security, privacy, all of that. And yeah, I did not even think about that. And so now it's making me rethink a lot of this. That kind of same article also kind of said, hey, this is kind of like the sandbox to kind of think outside of the box in a way. But that AI could maybe help with students with disabilities, how to assess projects in which students submit a combination of their own work plus using AI, and whether getting personalized feedback from AI can help in writing. So pros and cons to it, and an ongoing conversation.
Absolutely. And if there is anything that I took from that article, it's that there's so much that is still speculative. There's so much that is in the hypothetical. I think that article cited a Harvard Business Review post from just earlier this year in March. And it was all approximately 12% of workers are in occupations that are likely that Gen AI might automate some. It's again, so speculative, so incomplete, that's one of the benefits of having these conversations, is that we continue to fill in those gaps. We'll continue to discover more of the realities of the effect of AI and the meaning of AI for everybody involved or influenced if we continue to have the conversations. But if we throw up our hands and say that's not what this is about, this is not what we're supposed to be doing, then we're basically giving ourselves a ticket to the exit.
Yeah. And then there's also, if you rely on AI as a civilization, are we losing the incentive to understand concepts and ideas for ourselves? And, are we losing the incentive to teach it to others, especially the next generation? And I think that's probably also a concern Daniel and Jeremy had as well.
Indeed.
Well, I think this wraps it up. It was a great discussion, and look forward to hearing more perspectives on AI.
Yeah, can't wait.